Wyoming Territory, October 1874, the wind was sharp coming down from the Bighorns, dragging a whisper of snow across the dry grass as Loretta Rayburn stepped off the wagon in the town of Barlow Creek, clutching her worn satchel like it was armor. She had not cried when they left Missouri, not when the whispers followed her through every store and church. Big teeth, horse teeth, grin like a shovel, but now, standing in a town she had never seen, her hands trembled. She had nowhere left to go. Her uncle had died in June, and the woman he married, never fond of that girl with a mouth too wide for her face, had sent Loretta off with a one-way ticket west and a letter of introduction to a schoolhouse she was not sure even existed. Loretta adjusted her bonnet, jaw clenched, lips pressed tight. She had learned long ago to hide her smile. "Miss Rayburn," the voice came from behind her, warm and low. She turned and met the eyes of a man leaning against the post outside the general store. He stood tall in a sun-faded duster, his dark blonde hair curled at the edges of his hat brim, and he looked at her like he had been expecting her since sunrise. "I'm August Shepherd," he said, pushing off the post and walking toward her. "I own the Double S Ranch just west of town. I heard you came in lookin' for the schoolhouse. It is real, though not much more than 4 walls and a stove." Her throat tightened. "Yes, I thank you, Mr. Shepherd." "August," he said, gentle. "Come on, I will show you where it is." "You look worn through." She followed him across the dusty street, her boots biting blisters into her heels, her skirt hem damp with slush. The town was small, 2 rows of buildings and a livery, and beyond it, the land rolled wide and open, dotted with cottonwoods and pale gold grass. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of a creek, paint peeling, door hanging a little slanted, but it had a roof, 4 windows, a bell. "I keep up repairs when I can," August said, opening the door. "You will find a potbelly stove in the corner, wood stacked out back." "No one's taught here since spring." Loretta stepped inside. Her heart clenched. It was simple, sure, but it was hers. She turned to thank him, but he was not looking at the schoolhouse. He was looking at her like she was the only bright thing in that gray wind. "You do not smile much, do you?" he asked. She flinched. "No, people tend to point when I do." He tilted his head, eyes narrowing just slightly in thought. "That's so." "It is just my teeth," she said, voice low. "They are large, I know." August studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, broad and sure, with a line of one dimple in his cheek. "Well, I think that is the kind of smile belongs at my supper table." Her breath caught. "Excuse me," I said, he replied. "That is the smile I want at my supper table, every night." She stared at him. No man had ever said anything like that to her. Most looked down or away or laughed behind their hands. "You do not even know me," she said. "Not yet," August said, "but I would like to." The first snow hit 3 nights later. Loretta had lit the stove and stayed in the schoolhouse, sleeping on a cot someone had left behind. She woke cold and sore and with ink on her fingers from staying up writing lesson plans. August came by that morning with a basket of biscuits and apples. "I figured you might not have much yet," he said, "and you are going to need your strength if you are going to teach those wild fools who call themselves children around here." She took the basket, stunned. "Thank you." He tipped his hat, but his eyes lingered. "You smile in your sleep, you know." Her face burned. "How would you know that?" "I was checking in last night," he said, unapologetic. "I saw the light still on and made sure the fire was safe. Through the window, you watched me sleep. I watched you breathe." "There is a difference." His voice was even. "I just wanted to make sure you were warm." She opened the basket. The biscuits were still warm. She bit one and for the first time in a long time let herself smile without hiding it. August grinned. "There she is." The first student came a week later, then 2 more. By the end of the month, Loretta had 11 children sitting on benches made from sawed logs, learning letters and numbers and how to take turns. And every evening, August walked her to the schoolhouse or came by to chop wood or fix the flue. He never pushed, never asked for anything. He just showed up, solid, kind. One afternoon, he came with a little girl in his arms. "This is my niece, Lottie," he said quietly. "Her parents, my sister and her husband, were taken by fever last spring. She has been with me since." Lottie was 5, shy, with pale hair and a thumb in her mouth. When Loretta knelt and held out a hand, the girl blinked up at her, then smiled a big, toothy smile that looked just like her own. "She can come to school," Loretta said, voice soft. "No matter how small, I will make room." August looked at her, something deep in his eyes. "You always do." One night near Christmas, the wind howled so hard it rattled the windows of the schoolhouse. Loretta wrapped herself tighter in her shawl and prayed the woodpile would last. A knock came at the door. August stood there with a saddle blanket and 2 tin cups. "I figured you might want supper," he said. She stepped aside and let him in. He set the cups down, stew still hot, and moved to fix the drafty window. "You do not have to keep doing this," she said, voice quiet. "I know," he said, "but I want to." They sat at the table, knees touching. She watched the steam rise from her stew, then turned to him. "Why me?" she asked. "There are women prettier, softer, with smaller teeth." August reached across the table and touched her hand. "I have seen a lot of things, Loretta," he said. "Drought, death, men who lie and women who leave. But I have never seen a smile that made me feel like home until I saw yours." Her heart cracked wide open. "I do not want to hide it anymore," she whispered. "Then do not," he said. "Not with me," and she did not. She smiled, full and wide, and he leaned in, slow and sure, and kissed her like it was the first light after a long, dark winter. She laughed, breathless. "So this is what it feels like." August brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "What? To be wanted." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her like he never meant to let go. "You always were. You just needed someone who saw it." And in that little schoolhouse with snow at the windows and stew in their hands, Loretta knew he saw her, and she would never be alone again. The thaw came early that March, softening the hard edges of winter with the scent of cottonwood sap and damp earth. Mud swallowed wagon wheels and boots alike, but no one much complained. After a season like the last, even the mess of spring felt like mercy. Loretta stood behind the schoolhouse one morning, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing soot from the iron kettle in a basin of meltwater. The hills beyond the creek shimmered with new green, and birdsong tangled in the air like a hymn she didn't know the words to but still understood. "Miss Rayburn," a voice called from the side path. She wiped her hands on her apron and turned. Lottie stood there, holding a pie tin wrapped in a towel too large for her. A few steps behind, August waited, one hand resting lightly on his niece's shoulder. "Maud at the boarding house sent this," Lottie said, handing the tin over with both hands. "Said you ain't been in town all week, and it ain't right for a woman to eat only salt pork and apples." Loretta took the tin, warmth blooming in her chest. "Tell Maud thank you kindly." "That was thoughtful," Lottie nodded, then glanced back at August. "Uncle Gus says he's gonna build you a porch." August shifted his weight but didn't deny it. "Figured you might want a place to take tea come summer. Shade's better than a hot stove." Loretta arched a brow. "I haven't said yes. You haven't said no neither." His tone was even, but his eyes held something quieter than teasing. "Just thought you might like the choice." She set the pie tin aside and brushed a damp curl from her cheek. "I've never had a porch, I know." Lottie tugged at August's sleeve. "Can I go see the lambs now?" He nodded. "Don't chase them." When the child skipped off toward the edge of the schoolyard, Loretta stepped closer, voice low. "You never talk about your sister." His jaw flexed. "Not much to say. There's always something." He looked down at his boots for a long moment before speaking. "Her name was Clara. She was 6 years older and mean as a badger if she thought I'd done wrong. But she was the one who taught me how to tie a rope and how to clean a fish without ruining the meat. She could shoot straighter than me and sing prettier too." Loretta waited. She married young, fella from over near Sundance. Good man. They weren't rich, but they had each other. Then the sickness came, and it took him first. Clara didn't last a week after. She reached for his hand. "And Lottie," she saw it all. His voice cracked on the last word. "She don't talk about it either." They stood like that, hands joined, the wind threading soft through the grass. "She likes you," he said finally. "Trusts you. I like her too." He studied her then, gaze steady. "I'm not just building that porch for tea." "I know." That night, after the children had gone home and the light had cooled to lavender, Loretta stepped out the back door and found August laying the first boards along the foundation stones he'd hauled from the creek. She crossed her arms, a smile tugging at the edge of her mouth. "You work fast, I work sure," he said, not looking up. She sat beside him on the ground, the scent of sawdust and river stone between them. He handed her a square nail and gestured to the beam. "Hold it steady," she did, and when he hammered it in 3 clean strikes, something settled in her chest. Not giddy, not breathless, just right. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. He wiped sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "Used to. After the war, I thought maybe I'd go south. Texas, maybe, but I never did." "Why not?" "I was waiting." "For what?" He looked at her then, brow furrowed. "Didn't know, just knew I'd know when it came." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. A week later, when the porch stood finished with a bench he'd built from pine planks and sanded smooth as silk, Loretta brought out a tin pot of chicory coffee and a plate of cornmeal cakes. They sat side by side, the bench creaking under their shared weight, watching dusk settle over the creek. "I had no intention of staying here," she said after a long silence. "When I came, I know. I thought I'd teach a term and move on, maybe find a place where no one remembered my face." August reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the back of her knuckles like a promise. "You found one." She squeezed back. They didn't kiss that night, didn't speak much more. But when Lottie came out in her nightdress to sit between them, yawning against her uncle's arm, Loretta wrapped a shawl around the child's shoulders and stayed there until the stars came out. And in the stillness, there was no need to hide. Not her teeth, not her past, not her heart, she belonged. And he was building a life around that truth, one board, one glance, one quiet evening at a time. By late April, the ground had dried enough for planting, and the cottonwoods along the creek unfurled their pale green leaves like a hymn whispered through the branches. Loretta woke each morning to birds nesting in the eaves of the schoolhouse and the hushed shuffle of children arriving early to help sweep ash from the stove or wash the slates. She had started keeping a tin of peppermints in her desk, one earned for a full week of good manners, another for spelling arithmetic without stumbling. The children took to it with solemn pride. One evening, August brought over a sack of seed potatoes and a rusted spade. "Ground behind the porch is soft enough now," he said. "Thought maybe you'd like a kitchen patch." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I've never planted anything. I'll show you." They worked in the quiet warmth of late afternoon, his hands moving with easy rhythm as he dug rows and pressed each potato chunk into the earth, eyes flicking up now and then to make sure she followed. She didn't speak much, but her fingers grew steady, and the smell of turned soil settled deep in her chest like something she hadn't known she missed. Later, she sat on the porch steps, brushing dirt from under her nails. "Where'd you learn to do all that?" August tilted his hat back. "My mother. She kept a garden clear through the lean years, said even if we didn't have meat, we'd have onions." Loretta smiled faintly. "She used to hum when she worked," he went on, "old tunes from Tennessee. Ones I can't remember the words to, but I still know the sound. Do you ever hum them?" "Sometimes, when I think Lottie's missing her." Loretta looked out toward the pasture where the last light slanted golden across the scrub. "You carry a lot." He didn't answer right away. "Then so do you." The breeze picked up and she stood brushing off her skirts. "I baked cornbread. There's enough if you want to stay." He followed her inside. The schoolhouse had grown into something more than 4 walls. There was color now. A quilt draped over the cot, pressed flowers hanging to dry near the stovepipe, a table that didn't wobble anymore because August had planed the legs even. They ate without hurry, steam rising from the cornbread and beans. Lottie, already asleep in the alcove they'd curtained off for her, stirred once, then settled. After, Loretta lit a lantern and sat in the chair by the stove, the firelight catching the edges of her cheekbone. August leaned back against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You ever think about your own people?" she asked. He blinked. "What do you mean? You talk about your mother, your sister, but not your father." He shifted his weight. "He was a hard man, fought in Mexico. Came back with a bottle and a temper." She waited. "He didn't think much of books, or quiet, or boys who cried." She nodded slowly. "Mine didn't think much of women who read too fast or smiled too wide." August came to sit across from her, the lantern between them. I reckon it takes years to scrub a voice like that out of your bones. She looked down at her hands. I used to cover my mouth even when I laughed, like it wasn't mine to let loose. He was silent a long time, then he reached across and took her hand, thumb brushing her knuckles. You laugh now, he said, only here, here's enough. The lantern hissed as the oil burned low. She didn't move her hand from his. You ever think about more? He asked softly. She tilted her head. This, he said, a home with walls made for staying. Not just passing through, her throat tightened. I never let myself. I'd build it, he said. With you, not for you, with. The quiet swelled around them deep and warm. She looked at him then, and the last of the fear she carried cracked loose. I want that, she said. With you, he stood and pulled her gently to her feet. I'll start drawing up plans, he murmured. She didn't answer. Just rested her forehead against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Outside, the creek kept on running, and the wind carried the scent of soil and new beginnings. Inside, Loretta let herself be held, and for the first time she believed the life she had longed for wasn't something she had to chase. It was already here. And it was hers. By early May, the creek had swelled from snowmelt, and the fields behind the schoolhouse wore the deep green of new life. The school term was winding toward its close, and Loretta spent her evenings reviewing arithmetic slates by lamplight, her fingers stained faintly with chalk. One Sunday afternoon, she and August stood in the half-shadow of a cottonwood near the edge of the pasture, watching Lottie lean over a fence rail, calling softly to a calf just a few days old. The air smelled of damp wood and sun-warmed hide. She's been sleeping easier, Loretta said, brushing a bit of bark dust from her sleeve. August nodded once. Started humming again, too, not songs I know, just little sounds. I think it means she feels safe, she does, and not just because of me. Loretta turned toward him, brows drawn. You think you'll ever tell her about her parents, the full truth? I will, when she's ready to carry it. He glanced down at the scuffed toe of his boot. And when I can speak it without falling apart halfway through, you won't have to speak it alone. He looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This came 2 days ago, from Cheyenne, clerk down there's a cousin of mine. I'd asked him after something, just in case. He held it out to her and she took it cautiously. The ink was faded in places, but she could make out the words well enough. A deed. 40 acres due west of his current fence line, bordering the creek with water rights and a small timber allowance. It's in your name, he said. She blinked. Why? Because I want you to have something of your own, not borrowed, not given as charity, yours. But he stepped closer, his voice steady. You've built something here more than lessons and slates. You've changed the way this place breathes. I see it every day in the way folks look at you now, and I want to build with you, not over you. She folded the paper and pressed it against her chest. You sure? I'm certain. She looked up at him then, the wind catching the edge of her skirt. I'd like a garden with onions. And a place for bees, he smiled. I'll build the hives myself. That night she sat at the end of the new porch, watching the last of the sun slip behind the hills. Lottie was inside, asleep with a penny book tucked beneath her pillow. August came out carrying a small wooden box and set it beside her. What's that? He lifted the lid. Inside lay a length of blue calico, a packet of seeds, and a brass thimble. Wedding gifts, he said plainly, her breath caught. You haven't asked me yet. He looked out toward the pasture, voice low. I didn't want to put you in a place where you'd feel beholden. I wanted you to choose. I do, he turned toward her. I choose you, August Shepherd. For every supper table and every hard winter and every spring that smells like this one. The box sat between them, but he reached past it and cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs brushing the corners of her jaw. I'll never make you hide again. She leaned into him, her voice barely a whisper. I'm not afraid anymore. They kissed there, under the lavender sky, with the porch still smelling of sawdust and the creek running steady below. In the morning, she would walk back into the schoolhouse and begin her last lessons of the term. In a few weeks, they would be married beneath the cottonwoods, with wildflowers in her hair and Lottie carrying a basket of dried corn. But for now, Loretta rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the quiet sound of the land settling into night, and knew that nothing about this love was small or borrowed. It was hers, and it would last. The morning they married, the wind was still, the sky a clear, tempered blue that hadn't been seen since the year turned. Loretta rose before the sun, tying her hair in a low knot with her mother's ribbon, the only thing she'd kept from her childhood trunk in Missouri. She washed her hands twice before lifting the blue calico August had given her and smoothing it over her hips. It wasn't fine fabric, but it held the scent of cedar from the box, and it had been chosen with care. In the corner, Lottie stirred beneath the quilt and sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. She blinked at Loretta's dress, then pushed the covers aside and patted over in her bare feet. "Will you still be Miss Rayburn?" she asked. Loretta knelt beside her, brushing Lottie's hair with her fingers. "No, after today I'll be Mrs. Shepherd," Lottie frowned. "Will I have to call you that?" "No, you can still call me Loretta if you want." Lottie nodded, then leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Loretta's neck. "I want you to stay. I will." That afternoon, they were married beneath the cottonwoods just south of the schoolhouse, where the creek bent wide and shallow, the grass soft and new beneath their feet. August had worn his best shirt, the one with the mended collar, and stood with his boots planted square in the shade. The town's blacksmith, who also served as justice of the peace, read the vows in a voice that carried steady across the open air, and Loretta said yes with her chin lifted and her eyes never leaving August's. Maud from the boarding house brought a fresh loaf of wheat bread, and the livery boy, Amos, showed up with a bouquet of prairie lilies he'd picked himself. Lottie carried a basket of dried corn and scattered it in slow handfuls at their feet, solemn as a preacher. They kissed only once, quiet and sure, while the breeze moved through the trees like a benediction. By dusk, the guests had gone, leaving behind a plate of molasses cookies and a bottle of blackberry cordial. Loretta and August stood just beyond the porch, watching the light fade and the fireflies rise from the tall grass. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist. "You sure you're not regretting this?" "I've never been more certain of anything," she said. "I've never been more myself than I am with you." He cupped her face, rough palms cradling her jaw. "I want to build you a room with windows that face the sunrise, a place to read and rest. You've held up so many others. I want you to have a place to be still." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "Then let's build it together." They spent the next weeks with sleeves rolled and boots mudded, laying out the foundation for the house that would rise beside the schoolhouse. They used pine for the frame, hauled from the forest edge where August had a permit. Each board was measured twice, every nail driven with care. Loretta chose the spot for the hearth, and August shaped the mantel from a piece of driftwood they found lodged near the creek bend. Inside, Lottie found a rhythm of her own. She helped Maud in the mornings while the new house was raised and came home early to practice her letters by the fire. She stopped sucking her thumb, started folding her dresses without being told. One afternoon, she asked if she could call August Pa. He nodded, eyes bright, and when she whispered it for the first time, Loretta had to turn away to keep from crying. By midsummer, the house stood finished. 2 rooms, a porch that wrapped around the east side, and a kitchen window that looked out over the creek. On the first night they slept inside, rain tapped gently on the roof, and the fire burned low in the hearth. August pulled Loretta close beneath the quilt, her head resting on his shoulder, and they didn't speak, just breathed each other in. In the weeks that followed, they planted beans and squash in the kitchen patch, and August built the beehives Loretta had asked for. She set them back near the cottonwoods, where the wildflowers grew thick and humming. On Sundays, they rode into town together in the wagon, Lottie between them, her feet swinging just above the floorboards. Loretta no longer flinched when someone caught her smiling. She laughed freely now at August's dry remarks, at Lottie's morning songs, at the way the hens chased each other through the yard. The ache she'd carried for so long had softened into something she could look at without flinching. One evening, she sat on the porch with a book open on her lap, the sunset reflecting off the creek like fire. August came up from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "You remember that first day?" he asked, sitting beside her. I remember thinking you were too sure of yourself," he chuckled. "You were wrong." "No," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "You just happened to be right." He kissed her temple, and they sat there while the sky darkened and the frogs began their low chorus in the marsh. Lottie lit the lanterns inside, one by one, and when she stepped out to call them in, her face glowed with the kind of peace only children can wear without effort. Loretta rose and took August's hand, and together they went inside, closing the door behind them, the warmth of their home settling around them like a second skin. Their life was not grand. It was not free of sorrow or worry or the small trials that came with land and weather and time. But it was true, and it was shared. And every morning when the sun rose behind the cottonwoods, it shone on a family that had chosen each other not once, but again and again in word and in deed, and that was forever.